everybody, more adventures here. It's that spooky season and we're at Halloween Horror Nights, so stay tuned because we're going to be talking about it all week long. If you're wondering what Halloween Horror Nights is an after-hours separate ticketed event at Universal Orlando and Universal Hollywood. It consists of 10 immersive haunted houses and 5 scare zones. A few of the rides are open as well: Men in Black, The Mummy, Gringotts Bank, and the Rock and Roll roller coaster. This year is the introduction of 2 new icons, and you're supposed to choose between the horror of sinister and surreal. And this is one of those scare zones I talked about. This is Demon Queens, a hellscape filled with 4 merciless queens loyal to surreal. As always, you come to more adventures for my honest opinion, and while the sheer amount of scare actors in the zone was extremely impressive, the lack of large props really hurt the zone. This is the first year of the new parade, and they have to have movable props in the zone to accommodate the parade floats. And you can really tell, especially compared to the last few scare zones that were here. Having said that, the scare actors' costumes and energy are extremely impressive. They alone made the scare zone amazing. Here's a more adventurous tip. If your schedule allows, I recommend getting to the event when it's already dark. The atmosphere and the spookiness is definitely amplified. We are fortunate enough to be able to go multiple nights, so we like to go our first night after dark, and then whenever other visits, we go earlier. As you can see, going earlier, you really can appreciate the impressive detail of the props and the scare actors' costumes. And that's one of the things that sets Halloween Horror Nights at Universal apart from other haunts, the attention to detail. Now, Universal wants you to consider this area a scare zone, but in actuality, it's just a large trestle with a sign, "Welcome into Horror Nights." But they call this zone Duality of Fear. This is where you must choose between the horror of sinister or surreal. The sign is the only prop, but the unhinged disciples of surreal and sinister populate this area with their chainsaws. But of course, it does make for a really fun photo op. The next scare zone we explored was Swamp the Undead, a bayou in Central Park overrun with zombies, boats, and dense foliage. This is always one of my favorite scare zones because of the natural covering of the trees and how narrow the zone is. On the flip side, on a super busy night, it can be extremely crowded and hard to walk through. But if you're lucky enough to walk through there with not a lot of guests, it's one of the few scare zones where they actually have some impressive hidden boo holes. The props in the scare zone were absolutely stunning and creative. Universal's creative team did a fantastic job. Due to how narrow the walkway is, you're going to have some up-close and personal interactions with the scare actors. As you can see from this video, we were lucky enough to go through a few times when it wasn't so crowded. As I said in last year's video, and this isn't so much a tip as a Universal PSA, but go into the event with the right attitude. No one there wants to see you try to scare a scare actor. You're not as funny as you think you are, and all you're doing is ruin it for the other people. You're at a Halloween horror-themed event. Having actors try to scare you is part of the fun. Now, I'm only talking to a small portion of guests. The vast majority of people who go to Horror Nights are there to have a good time. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. But on a more positive note, this is one of the coolest shots I got at this year's event. Another scare zone was Enter the Blumhouse. They had a few props set up, but ultimately the zone ended up being a giant selfie station. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with that, especially getting a selfie of some of your favorite characters from the Blumhouse movies. The Grabber, Megan, the characters from Freaky. I do think it's pretty cool to get up close and personal with some of the characters from your favorite movies. And you can't forget the Purge. And now it's time to enter the final scare zone, the Torture Fair. Enter this Renaissance fair where only the bravest souls dare face the medieval torture devices. Can you endure the torment, or will you beg for mercy? The New York location will always be the largest scare zone at Horror Nights, and as you can see from the video, this one has a ton of props set up because it's not in the parade path. Now I know we're pretty far into the video, but if you're squeamish, Halloween Horror Nights might not be for you. They really do embrace the horror aspect of this event, and you can see that in this scare zone. Hey everybody, if you like this adventure, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. Before we get our brains bashed in. It really helps the channel more than you realize. This is a very unique scare zone because it has a lot of comedic elements, but some pretty disturbing imagery is sprinkled throughout the zone. You can really see the scare actors are really embracing the absurdity and the violence in equal measure. And Universal does have a warning, and the event is not recommended for anybody under the age of 13. The scare zone is also going to be where you're going to find the entrance to the tribute store. The last few years, the tribute store has really upped its game, and this year is no exception. But in all honesty, the theme of the tribute store last year, walking through a comic book, will always hold a special place in my comic geek heart. But this year's theme of walking through a post-apocalyptic landscape, searching for the elusive giant bat creature that haunts these tunnels, was nothing to sneeze at. And it's super convenient having a giant store where 90% of the merchandise is located. That way you don't have to wander around the whole park looking for your favorite t-shirt. That's always a plus. And of course, there's always some exclusive items that you can only purchase at the tribute store. Seriously, check out the attention to detail. You really feel like you're in a rundown, abandoned New York subway tunnel. Wait, what's that up in the corner? It's not an urban legend. The giant bat creature actually exists. Thank God we saw it before it saw us. A cool addition this year, and it's located right near the iconic Mel's Dine-In, is a hidden HHN bar. Every night we went, it wasn't that crowded, and we got some memorable interactions with a variety of different characters from the houses. We both quite enjoyed getting to interact with the scare actors, because going through the house in a conga line, you don't really have the time to interact with any of them. This was a great experience. And back for Halloween Horror Nights 2024 is the infamous Death Eaters in Diagon Alley. It was super cool to see the Death Eaters again, but in all honesty, this year's show just felt off. Last year's show was much more impressive with the use of pyrotechnics. This year, it seemed to be lacking. Of course, no trip to Universal Studios Orlando is complete without having a tasty cold butterbeer. Of course, during Halloween Horror Nights, they have a ton of tasty treats. The original and still iconic pizza fries, the super popular and delicious walking taco, Louise approved, the insidious red velvet cake pop, and last but not least, the Instagrammable State Puff Marshmallow S'more. And now that all that's covered, it's time to dive into these amazing haunted houses. The first house we experienced this year was the Museum Deadly Exhibits. This wasn't high on my list, but it did not disappoint. The next house we experienced was Slaughter Cinema 2. Get ready for the final cut. It's time for another horror movie marathon at the Cary Drive-In. We loved the original house and thought this was a worthy successor. As you can see, the entrance to the house was a replica of the Cary Drive-In itself. I wanted to share this awesome view of the trailers playing with the Florida storm in the background. Don't worry, we didn't get rained on. Then it was off to Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines. All female, all fearless, all fatal. We have loved the past Universal themed houses, but this one seemed to be lacking something. Right next door to the Monsters house was Goblin's Feast, where they feast on your flesh because you are the main course. This was an absolutely beautiful house with some really impressive sets and costumes. Universal also had a new queue area back here, which really worked well. Next up was Major Sweet's Candy Factory, where you're the chaperone and the samples have turned the children into sugar-coated killers. It was one of the goriest houses at this year's event. As we make our way back up to the front of the park, we come to one of the more surprising houses, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, based upon the recent movie. It was so much better than I thought it would be, and I actually got a couple jump scares. And now we come to the absolute scariest house at this year's event, Insidious Into the Further. This house was completely designed to scare you from every angle, by far the creepiest and scariest house at this year's event. The other houses were Monstros, based upon Monsters of Latin America. This house was full of impressive costumes and the largest animatronic at this year's event. The next house we're going to talk about is Triplets of Terror. This was kind of a generic slasher house, but the actors really did step up the intensity the last couple nights. And I give all the credit in the world to Universal for attempting to do a house based upon A Quiet Place. And while the Death Angels were extremely impressive, it was definitely lacking in any sort of scares. Well, that's it for this year's creepy, spooky Horror Nights adventure. But don't worry, more adventures are just around the corner. So remember, life's short. Have more adventures.